You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one on one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical, tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1330. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice you absolutely love. We do that through covering all sorts of things in regards to the business side, the marketing side, how to find new clients, strategies around marketing and social media. And we go on the clinical side, the side of saying you should be doing work that you love. You shouldn't be showing up and saying, these aren't the clients I want to work with. You should feel good about it. You should feel like everything you're doing is in alignment as best as you can. So as we enter into this new year, we are doing some amazing interviews as well. You've probably been following my series on me starting a counseling practice from scratch. So as many of you know, I sold my practice in 2019 and then have been out of practice during that time, still doing consulting, working with thousands of you in growing your private practices. But I decided about 6 weeks ago that I was going to start a practice from scratch, to have that beginner's mind. So if you are following that journey, you'll see it on TikTok, you'll see it on the podcast of me talking through every single phase, working only 2 hours a week. So I'm not spending tons and tons of hours on it. It's to say, okay, if I'm going to be really smart and spend 2 hours a week building a practice, how am I doing that? Where am I spending my time? And then reflecting each week in regards to where I've spent my time. So make sure you're following that series as well. And I'm so excited today to have my friend Thais Gibson with us. Thais is a best-selling author, coach, PhD, and founder of the Personal Development School for Relationships. She has over 13 different certifications in CBT, NLP, somatic experiencing, and many more. Her YouTube channel has over 75 million views, and she is best known for her work on founding Gibson Integrated Attachment Theory, the neuroscience of how to rewire your attachment style. Thais, welcome to the Practice the Practice podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the idea that you're actually modeling how to start a practice 2 hours a week from scratch. I think that's so cool. It sounds very entertaining.
Yeah, this week I'm super excited because I'm going to be working with my website designer who on Friday is going to be showing me the final version of the website. As soon as all that's set up, I'm going to post the hiring. I'm not going to be doing any of the clinical work. And so should be hopefully hiring within the next 2 or 3 weeks, starting from scratch,
Cool.
just a month in. So
That's fun. I love that. I love that you're documenting the whole journey. I feel like that'll help so many people too, because I've met so many amazing practitioners over the years who just really struggle with the business side of things. So,
yeah.
what a cool resource for people.
Well, and I think also just getting back into like all the little micro decisions a practice owner has to make at the beginning and remembering how it's like, should I take insurance? Should I? If I'm taking insurance, like, should I do my own billing? Should I have someone do it? Should I work with Headway? Just all those micro decisions. So it's really fun to dive right back in.
Yeah, good for you. That's so cool.
So attachment style and attachment theory. So was that something that like in graduate school you knew like that's my thing, or was it something that over time you said, okay, I really like am into this, and it developed over time as something that you dove into?
It definitely developed over time. So I was about 2 or 3 years into my private practice originally when I met my now husband and going on 11 years ago. And we, hit it off and I thought that we were really compatible. And then we moved in together almost 2 years into the relationship. And as we started living together, I noticed different things sort of come up, both for myself and for him. And I had learned about attachment theory in like first year university at a very high level. And, they talk a little bit about, okay, here's the 4 attachment styles and the work of John Bowlby and the strange situation experiment with Mary Ainsworth. And they go through and they talk about these things. But then they don't talk as much about how this really affects you in your adult life. And what was really interesting is what I was originally working on with people was a lot of like their triggers, a lot of like cognitive behavioral therapy tools, somatic experiencing tools, and how to identify these things, and then sort of bringing in techniques from hypnotherapy, which I did a really long form certification in, and how to take CBT and sort of help people rewire these actual triggers at a deeper level more permanently. And what I found that was so interesting is that as I revisited attachment styles, sort of to do my own work on myself and to understand myself and my husband's dynamic a little bit better, which was very powerful and really led to like a great sort of set of breakthroughs. But as I recognized people's attachment styles, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. These core wounds and triggers that I was working with people on. If I knew somebody's attachment style, they had very specific triggers. So for example, anxious attachment styles, their big core wounds tended to be around abandonment, being alone, excluded, disliked, rejected, not good enough, unloved. Dismissive avoidance, they had completely separate triggers, more around being trapped or engulfed, helpless, powerless, seen as shameful or defective, sort of from that defectiveness schema point of view. And what I realized is, oh my goodness, if I know somebody's attachment styles, I'm going to know these specific triggers they tend to struggle with most. Then I recognized, okay, these needs, a lot of the work I was doing originally was helping people learn their own needs and how to meet them as a form of self-regulation and self-soothing. And the nervous system work, somatic experiencing work and completion cycles and really widening our window of tolerance, like a lot of that work that I was doing with people, as soon as I knew people's attachment styles, it fit neatly into these categories. So as I really dove back into that research and started digging more deeply, I was like, oh my goodness, the way I'm working with people can be improved and a lot more streamlined and a lot more efficient by focusing on people's attachment styles and actually how to rewire them to become securely attached.
Now, a lot of folks, haven't been in grad school for a while, and they may not have even kept up with all the research on attachment styles. What would you hope that would be common knowledge to the average therapist, at this time?
I would say a few things. I mean, I would say the four major attachment styles, and maybe we can kind of go through and explore them and how
Yeah.
they come about. But most importantly, before I even get into that, I would say the entire approach to this, in my opinion, and this is obviously my opinion, is that knowing your attachment style is as useful as knowing how to rewire it. Like if
Mm,
we're only knowing our attachment style, we're not doing the work to change it to become insecure, because you're not born with an attachment style. It gets conditioned into you through repetition and emotion over time. That's firing and wiring those neural networks. So we want to help people be able to change their attachment style. And that's a very easy possibility that can become really streamlined. So, for starters, the original body of attachment theory was done by John Bowlby and later Mary Ainsworth, originally out of Cambridge University. And there are four major attachment styles. Every single person has one. And 50% of the population, roughly, is securely attached. So secure attachment styles get a lot of approach-oriented behavior in childhood. In other words, when children are growing up in a secure home, parents are attuned. They're present. They approach the child when the child's expressing distress or negative emotion, and they empower the child to help the child soothe, and they mirror the child's emotions well. They empathize effectively. And these kind of sound like small things, but in the grand scheme of things, it's actually conditioning a child to essentially go, okay, my emotions are worthy of being seen and heard. It's safe to be vulnerable. I can trust other people. I can rely on people. I'm worthy of love when I'm in a good mood and when I'm having a hard time. And so their worthiness doesn't feel like achievement dependent, but more is actually like I'm worthy as I am for who I am, because that's the messaging they're getting and their conditioning from their attachment figures. And so securely attached adults, coming from a household where they learn healthy communication, healthy co-regulation, securely attached adults end up not just reporting having the longest lasting relationships, but statistically also report having the most fulfilled relationships, which I think is an important metric, because you've seen, I'm sure, as everybody listening has seen, people who are in long lasting relationships, but they're not happy at all. And so I think those two things are very important to recognize. Then we have the other, 50% of the population mixed up by three insecure attachment styles. And on it, as sort of an analogy or an image in your mind, you can sort of imagine it as existing along a continuum. At one end of the continuum, you have your anxious attachment styles, anxious preoccupied attachment styles. So anxious attachment styles, they grow up with real or perceived abandonment. So the obvious real abandonment is that a parent leaves and they don't come back, maybe a fatherless home, for example, a bad divorce, or even a more intense trauma where perhaps a parent passes away from an illness at a young age for the child. And in this case, there's a very real abandonment. But what's really interesting from a neuroscience point of view is that if somebody has very repetitive small T trauma over time, it has a similar impact on the mind as a big T trauma. So if, when I say perceived abandonment, this is something that can also create anxiously attached individuals, which is that if you have very loving parents, but they're constantly gone. So let's say you have two loving parents, but they're always working, they're always traveling. And so there's this perception of love is there, love is taken away. Love is there, love is taken away. And so the conditioning of feeling like love is constantly being taken away, connection is being pulled back, causes a child to also get wired in these fears and triggers around abandonment and having these abandonment wounds in their adult lives. And so the adaptations that they make to these kinds of experiences in childhood are, okay, let me become really good at people pleasing. Let me win people over. Let me make sure that I can draw people in, and let me cling and anxiously attach individuals. Their main attachment strategy is to maintain proximity. They always want more closeness. Sadly, because they are so preoccupied with closeness and connection, sometimes it's at the expense of themselves, right? Like people pleasers, as you probably know very well, they self-abandon, they self-silence. And in doing that, they end up putting themselves in a position where they feel like they're put on the back burner and nobody's taking them into consideration. And so they often end up being attracted to and attaching to emotionally unavailable people, which just reinforces those wounds even further because they do feel abandoned again. So that's our anxious attachment style. I don't know if you want to jump in and say something before.
No, I love that you kind of broke down kind of the abandonment, bad divorces, and then kind of where it goes into. Let's go into number 3 and 4.
Okay, perfect. So on the flip side, you have sort of almost the opposite in many ways, the dismissive avoidant. So dismissive avoidants grow up with childhood emotional neglect as the overarching theme. And this can obviously be like very overt, very, very intense emotional neglect. Things like parents are never home and, kids are trying to figure out how to cook themselves macaroni and cheese, because the parent didn't come home that evening until midnight. You can have these really overt, obvious things, but the vast majority of the time it's very covert. And it's covert in the sense that parents are often stable and consistent, but they are not present and they are not attuned. And so what this teaches a child at a young age, because children are very much wired to be safe and to feel seen and to feel special. If those things are not happening, then a child ends up growing up in a household where they're like, wait, what is happening here? Why is this emotional part of me being rejected? I must be flawed or broken, because we know from behavioral stages of development, children personalize everything. So we have a child who grows up in a household where they constantly feel rejected and like their emotions are denied. And as an adaptation to this, they're like, well, I just need to become low maintenance. I will maintain my proximity by being low maintenance, by not needing anything, by not expressing my emotions. And so they adapt to this kind of childhood environment by repressing their emotional selves. And they often feel shame if they feel too vulnerable, because they're like, well, it feels shaming and rejecting if like I need this connection, I'm vulnerable and I'm reaching out for bids, but I'm just not getting it. And so as adults, we see dismissive avoidants end up being individuals who do the same thing that was done to them, right? They end up shaming other people's emotions at times, or dismissing, avoiding other people's emotions. They struggle to co-regulate because they didn't get healthy modeling for co-regulation growing up. And so they go to great lengths in their adult life to avoid vulnerability. And often there'll be individuals that will invest in relationships, but as soon as things get a little too real or a little too serious, they cut and run, or they shut down, or they become more emotionally unavailable, the more vulnerable they feel. And interestingly enough, anxious and dismissive avoidants often end up in relationships together where they salt each other's wounds a little bit. And then the very last one is the fearful avoidant, often referred to as the disorganized attachment style. And this attachment style grows up with the overarching theme of chaos. And you can think of all sorts of examples of this, having a parent who has narcissistic personality disorder, having a parent who's in active addiction. And let's just use it as an analogy, a parent who's an alcoholic. Okay, so let's pretend mom is the alcoholic. A child could come home one day and, from school, and mom's drinking, but she's in a good mood. She's sweet, she's kind of fun, she's loving, she's warm and actually giving love to her child and giving attention. But another day, the child comes home from school and mom is really drunk and she's an angry drunk now and she's cruel and she's unpredictable. And another day, mom is sobering up and she feels guilty about her behavior. And so she's kind of warm and more kind. Another day, mom is sobering up and she's going through detox and she's really struggling. And it's like the child grows up in an environment where you never know what version of the parents you're going to get. This can also be a really bad divorce where parents are caught in, or where children are caught in the middle between the parents. Situations essentially where the child's like constantly having to adapt to this by becoming hypervigilant, by trying to think 3 steps in the future. I had somebody say to me once, I knew by the way my mom closed the door when I was upstairs in my room, when my mom would come home, by the way she closed the front door when she got in, I knew what version of her I was going to get. And so it's like these kids, to adapt to their environment, you see anxious attachment styles cling, dismissive avoidance minimize their attachment needs, and fearful avoidance become extremely hypervigilant to body language, microexpressions, social cues, any breaks or changes in the pattern. But because they've had both positive and negative experiences around love and connection, they're wired with conflicting views about the same thing. In other words, they have this need for love and closeness because they've had some good experiences there, and they'll often draw people in, try to connect deeply, but then as soon as people do get close, they push away. So as adults, they become hot and cold. They're like, come get close, and somebody's close, and they're like, get back. And they oscillate and they pinball back and forth between their anxious and avoidant side, essentially. And they very much struggle with trust, with a sense of safety. They're very much in sympathetic nervous system mode. They're very in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn frequently. And so, those are sort of the overarching themes of the 4 attachment styles. But I think what's so powerful to know, and the message I really like to spread, is that you can solve that. We can rewire those things. We can change our attachment style, and there tend to be some powerful pillars for how to do so.
Yeah, let's definitely dive into that. I think, just identifying our partners or our kids, or even the things that could lead to those things is so important. Now, you said that there's some pillars on rewiring attachment styles. Take us through that.
Yeah, so there's 5 major pillars that really help us heal and change our attachment style from a neuroscience point of view. So the first one is rewiring our core wounds or our triggers. And I'll go through some maybe exercises for how to do that, or things that often are very useful and supportive in doing that, that we have data that just shows are extremely, extremely effective when people utilize them. But at a overarching level, I'll go through them first. So first is rewiring our triggers. So actually overcoming and healing through things like the fear of abandonment, the fear of being trapped, the fear of not being able to trust somebody, learning to rebuild those things. Then learning what our needs are so we can actually meet them ourselves first. It's profoundly healing for people to identify what needs they didn't get met in childhood and learn to meet them for themselves. So for example, if somebody didn't feel seen as a child, part of your healing of your attachment style becomes learning to see yourself, learning to attune to your own feelings and needs and make space for those things, learning to journal and self-explore and self-discover through introspective work and metacognition so that you can start to see yourself, right? You give to yourself what you didn't get as a child. And so that becomes the second pillar, which is learning your needs and how to meet them yourself. The third pillar then is taking those needs out and learning to communicate them with others, and learning powerful forms of communication, because all insecure attachment styles get poor modeling for communication. So we use tools like positive framing, for example, the difference between saying, you don't care about me, you never spend any time with me, versus, hey, I'm feeling disconnected and I would love to plan something fun to do so we can have more quality time together. Why don't we plan a date night for Sunday? And so, actually being able to positive frame, being specific is huge in this pillar, because a lot of times I'm sure people listening have seen this far too often where somebody says, I need support, and then their partner cooks and cleans, and then you come in for a session the next week and they're like, my partner didn't support me. And the one person says, I cooked and cleaned all week. What do you mean? And they say, oh, I needed encouragement, like words of affirmation. So oftentimes we will say we need something, but we won't paint a picture for what that looks like. And it leaves a lot of room for confusion where one person's trying to meet the need for support through cooking and cleaning, but what the other person actually needed was words of affirmation or encouragement. So, positive framing, painting a picture of what it looks like to get those needs met is huge for that pillar. And then at an overarching level, the next 2 pillars are learning somatic processing work and nervous system regulation. So actually being able to regulate our nervous systems, get out of sympathetic nervous system, move more into ventral vagal from the parasympathetic branch, and regulate ourselves. And then lastly, learning healthy boundaries. a huge part of rewiring our attachment style. So those are the 5 pillars at a high level, but we can definitely get into like more specifics.
Listen, I didn't take insurance in my counseling practice because I had no idea how to handle it. The process of accepting insurance outside of a group practice can be tough, but most people looking for mental health care want to use their benefits to pay for sessions. If you're like me and you feel a little scared about taking insurance, or you just want to make it easier on yourself, and you're interested in seeing clients through insurance, Alma can help. They make it easy to get credentialed with major insurance plans at enhanced reimbursement rates. They also handle all the paperwork, from eligibility checks to claim submission and guaranteed payment within 2 weeks. Plus, when you join Alma, you'll get access to time-saving tools for intake, scheduling, treatment plans, progress notes, and more in their included platform. It's going to make it so much easier for your team, so you can spend less time on administrative work and more time offering great care to your clients. Visit helloalma.com/Joe. That's helloalma.com/Joe to get started. I'm wondering, so I didn't hear in there confront your parents on what they did wrong. I think sometimes, like in therapy, I know that when I was practicing, someone would have these insights. I'm this kind of attachment style because, say, mom was an alcoholic, and then they want to go confront their mom. They expect the mom to say, "You're right, I'm sorry," and then that doesn't play out. It makes it worse sometimes. It may make it better, but a lot of this work sounds like starting with yourself, doing the rewiring with yourself, understanding what your body needs and feels, and then moving into the people that are in your life. Inviting them in and then setting boundaries with the people that, have the potential to hurt you, instead of expecting other people to change to make you better.
100%. I always say to people, it's not your fault that you have an insecure attachment style if you do, but it is your responsibility. And it's not mom's responsibility or dad's responsibility. And to your point, I love that you said that, because what actually hurts us the most from our attachment style, and where I see people having the hardest time forgiving and letting go, is because we develop so much of our relationship to self is formed by what was modeled and mirrored to us. And so often, for example, if you grew up in a household where, let's say, there was a lot of criticism, and let's say that's what you're upset about, well, then we take on that criticism and we become self-critical. And that happens a lot through our inner wounds, this idea that I'm not good enough or unworthy, or I'm bad, or, these sort of concepts that we get conditioned and imprinted with at a subconscious level. And then we're mad at somebody else for it. But people actually have the hardest time letting go of something that happened to them when they are still currently and presently doing those things to themselves. And so often, and I often get people like to do this exercise where it's like, write down the biggest wounds that were left from mom and dad, the beliefs you made about yourself because of those experiences. So you might say, well, my parents were always critical. Okay, so what did you make that mean about you? Oh, I made it mean that I'm not good enough, or I made it mean that I'm, unlovable. Okay, good. Well, do you still tell yourself that story? Do you still view yourself that way? When you make a mistake, does your mind still jump to those conclusions? And until you rewire them, it's going to be really hard to forgive somebody else for doing it, because it's so sensitive. You take it personally because it's currently personal to you. And so it's really about rewiring those things. And then also I get people to make a list of their biggest unmet needs from childhood and become masters at giving them those needs to themselves. And it's extremely powerful for people. And when we're doing this work, to actually rewire these things, we need repetition and emotion. So the subconscious mind, which is obviously the warehouse of our conditioning, it responds to repetition, emotion, and imagery across time. So as we're doing these things, they need to become practices that we practice across time for longer periods. And generally, you're looking at least 21-day cycles for needs. So for example, let's say somebody says, okay, well, I didn't feel safe growing up. I didn't get the need met for safety or to be seen. So, we talked earlier about the need to be seen. Maybe that's through journaling and metacognition work. Maybe that's through, meditation and practicing attuning to the feelings and sensations in your own body. But essentially, if it's safety, it might be regulating your nervous system, practicing doing breath work, or practicing polyvagal theory concepts to move from parasympathetic to sympathetic nervous system mode. Either way, we want to be practicing showing up for these needs on a daily basis, doing a needs check-in for 21 days. And as we do that, we're actually firing and wiring these new neural networks. And neural networks are like muscles. They atrophy over time if they're not being worked out, but they strengthen over time the more we practice them and use them. And so I always get people to go through these sort of 21-day cycles of meeting their biggest unmet needs from childhood so that they actually get patterned in at a deeper level and it becomes somebody else's natural set point.
Now, when you do those 21-day cycles, like what's an example of where someone was at that you've worked with, and then what they focused on during those 21 days, like what that looked like, and then what the result was?
Yeah, so it's really beautiful to watch, honestly. You'll generally see those things that people, it's really interesting. So there's sort of three parts to it. The first part is that we struggle to give to ourselves was never given to us. Okay, so that's very obvious. If somebody didn't get attunement growing up, they're not in tune with their own emotions. Um, and then we also, interestingly enough, then invest in people who mirror that back to us. So that's our subconscious comfort zone. And our subconscious mind wants what's familiar because it equates it to safety and thus survival. And so if you didn't get attunement growing up, you're probably not attuning to yourself. And then you're probably investing in people who are not attuned to you either. And you'll see these sort of themes play out. If you got criticized a lot growing up, you're probably very self-critical, and then you probably invest and attach to other critical people. And so we end up replaying these cycles. And what's really beautiful is that when we stop these cycles by changing the relationship to self first, what you'll start seeing is that not only do we start to recognize our standards differently, like when we start giving these things to ourselves and we heal from this sort of void of this need not being met, now we're also not okay with the wrong situation here. I always say to people, for example, around needs, it's like you're always going to accept breadcrumbs from people when you're starving. But when you learn to actually meet your own needs or develop your own bread in a way, then all of a sudden, if somebody is breadcrumbing or not showing up in a healthy way or not supportive of you, your standards have changed. You're like, wait, I make myself feel seen. I feel worthy in that now, or I know how to make myself safe. So now when somebody's doing things that are unsafe around me, I no longer accept that. I'm not comfortable with that anymore. And you can think of what's really interesting is that at a conscious level of mind, we say things all the time. We're like, I want the emotionally available partner. I want somebody who treats me very healthily and securely. Well, if you're not doing that to yourself, your alarm bells don't go off. So consciously you say you want these things, but your subconscious and unconscious mind collectively make up 95% of all of your decisions, choices, your beliefs, your thoughts, your emotions. And so when we are doing these things and reenacting these patterns in the relationship to self, we have very low standards around those same things when it comes to others. And so as people start to heal, as people start to actually like meet their own needs, let's say it's to feel seen, they feel more connected to themselves. They feel like they actually can have standards. When people are not attuned to them or present with them, they're going to speak up and communicate about it. They're going to notice it. They're going to set their boundaries. And if somebody is exhibiting unhealthy behaviors, the alarm bells ring. They're like, wait, I'm not used to this. This doesn't feel comfortable for me anymore. And so they'll actually stand up for themselves in a much healthier way.
It's interesting because I work with a ton of people that I would say are self-described high achievers. And I identify with that, where so much of my childhood, my takeaway was, kind of a star chart, work hard, get love, achieve, get love. And my parents would be mortified if they heard that, because I know that my dad's a psychologist, my mom's a nurse, like they gave lots of hugs. And yet somehow people, for whatever reasons, take out that message instead of the messages that were there. What can I do for myself? So you said, I loved how you said it. You said, hold on, let me go back to it. To become a master of meeting those unmet needs from childhood. What do most high achievers like me need to do to become a master of those unmet needs? Or like, what questions would you ask me to evaluate if I was to start to work on those?
So I would do it in a couple of ways. So the first thing is I would say, what do you make it mean, or what are you afraid is going to happen if you are not achieving? So let's say you start failing and you're not achieving at all.
Yeah.
What do you make that mean, or what are you afraid takes place?
I mean, I would say that it's like the economic security side, like feeling like a lot's been on my shoulders for a long time financially, both from childhood, but then also going into early adulthood, being the near sole income earner for most of, my marriage, and then we got divorced. And so the financial side of like it all falling apart if I don't achieve.
Okay, good. And if it all falls apart, what do you make that then mean, or what are you afraid happens
Hmm.
next?
Why did I open this box? um, what would I make it mean if it did fall apart? It's interesting though, because it's like then like right away my mind is going to like this is a similar feeling to like never wanting to get divorced and then going through a really brutal divorce that's still 5 years out. She's posting nasty stuff about me online all the time, and I don't do
Oh,
anything about it. And it's like, so things have fallen apart in that arena, and I've survived, and people showed up for me, and people supported me, and they watched my kids when things were tough. And it's like, I wouldn't say it's been fine, but it's also like I know that I can get through really tough stuff.
that's really beautiful. So that's very adaptive in terms of your approach and mentality. But if there was like a worst case scenario fear there, because I noticed how you sort of
Mhm.
consciously evaluate it.
Yeah.
If there was a worst case scenario fear there, would it be like if things fall apart, almost a fear of being helpless or unsafe or trapped in a situation where you couldn't
Mhm.
provide financially? Do any of those resonate with you?
I think if I couldn't provide financially, it's so funny to think through this. There would be a feeling of maybe like I'm not lovable, or maybe couldn't partner with people, or
Okay.
with my partner. I mean, I'm partnered with Claire, so not people.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's sort of this, so deep down there's almost this fear that if you didn't have the ability to financially provide, it makes you less lovable as a person, perhaps.
Yeah, or less attractive, or less, yeah,
Less
less
enough.
lovable. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, beautiful. And were there themes of that throughout your early childhood of feeling like, I mean, I guess you kind of just said that yourself, where you felt like you were loved for what you did rather
Mhm.
than just loved for who you were, just existing
Yeah.
on your good and bad days.
Yeah, and it's interesting though how quickly my mind goes into justifying those things, because I love my parents. I enjoy them. I have forgiven internally a lot of that stuff, and so I'm just noticing how quickly I'm like, but it was the like '80s, like no, like they were taking a step forward from the World War II generation, and they're like, so it's interesting how quickly I rationalize what I experienced.
It's very interesting. And it actually goes into the next two parts. So the first part is kind of identifying that deep underlying fear at a subconscious level, which is that fear of being not good enough if you didn't provide, or the fear of being not lovable or not as lovable if you couldn't provide. But what's so interesting too is usually, because your original question was like overachievers and what
Mhm.
are these things that are driving them? The first thing is to find the fear that drives you. And you can actually plug that into rewiring tools that I'm happy to share in a moment. So the first is that fear, but then generally, a lot of the conditioning of overachievers is to um, notice other people and their experiences and be more, almost in a way, like present in other people's experiences than your own.
Mhm.
And that justification that you made where you're like, but it was this time, it was the 80s, but nobody knew yet, rather than just honoring your own experience and being able to say like, hey, this is how I felt. I'm carrying that. And yes, that was given to me. It's not their fault. I'm not blaming anybody here, but honoring that, yeah, that might be a bit of my conditioning and that did come from them. And so rather than seeing yourself and sort of holding space for that, it's more like, and this is so common for overachievers, is overachievers, they see everybody else but themselves. And so they get so good at putting everybody else first and putting everybody ahead of themselves and taking care of everybody. And then your sort of needs and feelings are kind of on the back burner if there's time after everybody else. And I'm curious if that is a little bit of your experience.
100%. You're like a soothsayer.
so,
You could pull out
so
tarot cards and say all this, and I'd be like, "Let me buy whatever." No, I'm just kidding.
That's so funny. And then just the third thing to tie it back to the needs is just the third thing is to give to yourself what you couldn't get. So you can see in some of the conditioning that you shared is that the ability to also be seen, also be taken care of. And it doesn't have to necessarily be that then somebody comes and takes care of you financially, but maybe somebody holds really good space for you emotionally, or maybe somebody looks out for you, make sure that you're getting enough sleep, or checks in with you. And so the ability for you to receive as much as you're always trying to give, and the ability to actually practice active receiving, and to
Yeah.
practice having boundaries sometimes where you can take yourself into consideration. And so those are usually some of the big needs of people with that conditioning, is like, hey, make space for yourself too, make space for your own boundaries, make space for self-care, which I think sometimes feels very foreign to overachievers, almost like, wait, I'm not being productive. And instead of like, hey, no, this is productive for me to look out for myself and define what self-care really means to me. And I often give people the exercise, like sit down and look at, if I felt more seen and cared for as a child, what would that have looked like from my parents? And then whatever those answers are, that's what you have to end up giving to yourself the most.
So awesome. Wow, I feel like I got a lot out of this. If every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that, first of all, I think just honoring every private practitioner out there, because it is not easy work to be seeing people one-on-one and to be holding space. And honestly, I would say to people, like, to make sure that you're always pouring from a full cup, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges is I think this industry and this space is such a beautiful and sacred space where there's so many like amazing relationships you help people through, or relationships you build in a way with people, and obviously in a professional way, but care you build for people, and there's a sacredness to helping people work through their challenges and their problems, and it's such a beautiful thing. But I think the sort of shadow side in a way of the industry is that it's an easy space to get burned out in, because there's a lot of like emotional overfunctioning and really giving. And so I would say almost what I'm sharing with you, which is to make sure that you're taking yourself into consideration, your boundaries, your needs, really getting clear on like what recharges you as a person, like what fills your cup, and making sure that those are things you do first at the start of your day so that that is taken care of before you do anything else. And I find that that helps people operate at their fullest capacity where they're then most in alignment. And yeah, sleeping well, eating well, all the things that bring you to a space of self-care for sure.
So good. If people want to follow your YouTube or follow your work, where should we send them?
So I am at Thais Gibson, THAIS Gibson dash Personal Development School. I'm also on Instagram at The Personal Development School. And we also have a podcast, which is the Thais Gibson podcast.
Oh, Thais, thank you so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so nice to chat with you.
I think one of the best things about having a podcast is getting to just selfishly ask people questions for yourself, even if it's hard. It's like today, this is my 4th interview, and I think I have 3 or 4 more this week. And to just see how often these interviews line up with just my life. And so if you're looking for resources to build a podcast, to get support with a podcast, head on over to podcastlaunchschool.com. That's a great place that we've put together all sorts of resources for you as therapists that are starting podcasts. We have lots of free stuff over there. We have some things that aren't very expensive, and we have full-on packages to help you launch your podcast and have support with it. So podcastlaunchschool.com. Also, we couldn't do this show without our sponsors. Thank you so much to Alma for being our sponsor today. I wish Alma had been around when I had my private practice. I had no idea what I was doing. That's why I didn't take insurance. But if Alma had been there, I would have. And there's no reason that as a clinician, you should be spending hours on paperwork to bill for insurance, or not knowing for sure that you'll get reimbursed for sessions with your clients. If you're interested in seeing clients through insurance but don't want to navigate the process and paperwork on your own, Alma can help. They make it easy to get credentialed with major insurance plans at enhanced reimbursement rates and a guaranteed payment within 2 weeks. Visit helloalma.com/Joe. That's hello, ALMA.com/Joe to get started. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.